Everything changed with a woman's touch. As her hands moved over me, my life split into before and after. At 21, a stranger with ash-grey eyes in a New York gallery taught me that the person I was meant to be had been waiting for me all along. Subscribe for more videos made by and for lesbian women. Everything changed with a woman's touch. My life split into before and after that moment. The division was not a subtle, geological shift, but a clean, sharp break, like a piece of ceramic snapped in two. The before was monochrome, a life lived in a muted key, where I moved through the world with a polite smile and a quiet, persistent feeling of being an imposter in my own skin. The after was saturated with color, vibrating with a newfound frequency, a world where my senses were dialed to 11 and the deepest, most hidden part of me was not just seen, but celebrated. It all began with a woman's touch. But before the touch, there was the gaze. My name is Rose. I was 21 years old then, a student at New York University, adrift in the vast, noisy ocean of possibilities that is Manhattan. I was studying art, not out of any burning, singular passion, but because it was the only subject that didn't feel like a cage. In the swirl of pigments and the smell of turpentine, I could almost forget the nagging feeling that I was assembling a personality from a kit, piece by piece, hoping no one would notice the seams didn't quite match. It was an ordinary Saturday night, the kind that thrummed with a promise I could never seem to grasp. My friend Chloe, a whirlwind of relentless optimism, had dragged me to the opening party of one of the city's most famous galleries in Chelsea. "It's networking, Rose. It's life," she'd insisted, her voice cutting through my preferred soundtrack of quiet indecision. The gallery was a cavern of white walls and polished concrete, filled with the city's art elite, a cacophony of air kisses, pretentious commentary, and the clinking of champagne flutes. I felt like a ghost, transparent and insubstantial, moving through the crowd without leaving a ripple. I was cornered by a man explaining the post-structuralist anguish in a series of splattered paint canvases that, to me, looked like a toddler's happy accident. I nodded politely, my eyes glazing over, already planning my escape route to the fire exit. It was in that moment of desperate planning that my gaze, scanning for an escape, snagged on a solitary figure standing in the far corner. She was an island of calm in the swirling sea of social artifice. A woman, I guessed in her early 40s, standing with a stillness that was both self-contained and powerfully present. She held a glass of red wine, not as a prop, but as a natural extension of her hand, and her attention was fully absorbed by a large, dark landscape on the wall before her. Her short, black hair was shot through with elegant streaks of silver at the temples, a map of time lived. She wore a simple, impeccably cut black dress that followed the confident lines of her body, and there was an air of such profound self-assurance in her posture that it felt like a physical force field around her. But it was her face that held me captive. It wasn't conventionally beautiful in a magazine cover way. It was interesting. It was a face that had been lived in. And her eyes, they were the color of ash, of a winter sky just before snow. Even from across the room, I felt a startling depth in them. They weren't just looking at the painting. They seemed to be absorbing it, deciphering its secrets. I had the unnerving sensation that if those eyes were to turn on me, they could strip away the carefully constructed facade of Rose the art student and see the raw, uncertain girl trembling beneath. As if feeling the weight of my stare, she turned. Her ash-grey eyes locked directly onto mine. A jolt, like a static shock, went through me. I flinched, my cheeks burning with the heat of 1,000 suns. I had been caught. Mortified, I quickly looked away, pretending to be fascinated by a hideous abstract sculpture to my left. Without looking back, I turned and fled, pushing through the crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I headed for the opposite end of the gallery, seeking refuge in a quieter room filled with delicate watercolors. I tried to lose myself in the gentle washes of color, but my mind was reeling. Who was she? Why had I felt so seen, so exposed, by a single glance? I took a shaky breath, trying to regain my composure, convincing myself it was nothing, just a moment of social awkwardness. Minutes later, I felt a warm, soft breath on the nape of my neck. A shiver cascaded down my spine. "Are you running away so quickly?" a voice asked. It was low, melodic, like velvet rubbed against grain. I turned slowly, my pulse roaring in my ears. There she was. Up close, she was even more compelling. Fine lines fanned out from the corners of her eyes, and I could smell a faint, clean scent of sandalwood and citrus. I wasn't running, I managed to stammer, my voice betraying me by cracking. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "You're not very good at lying," she said, bringing her wine glass to her mouth. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. "You don't want to be here, do you?" The directness of her question disarmed me completely. I shook my head, unable to form words. "Neither do I," she confessed, her smile widening. "The art is mediocre, and the conversation is worse. What do you say we get out of here?" Her offer hung in the air between us, outrageous and thrilling. Go with her. A complete stranger. Every logical, self-preserving instinct in my body screamed no. This was how cautionary tales began. But a louder, more primal instinct, one that had been dormant for 21 years, stirred awake. It was a hunger, a curiosity that overrode all logic. Some nights, reason should be silent, and intuition should speak. "Let's go," I said, the boldness in my voice surprising even me. Her name was Julia. She didn't take me to a loud bar or a trendy club. Instead, we walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks before she hailed a cab. She gave an address across the river, in Brooklyn. The cab ride was a blur of city lights streaking past the window, the hum of the engine a backdrop to the thunderous beat of my own heart. I stole glances at her profile, silhouetted against the passing lights. She seemed perfectly at ease, her hands resting in her lap, a faint smile on her face. Her apartment was in a converted warehouse building, a loft space with high ceilings and large, industrial windows that would, in daylight, offer a stunning view of the city skyline. It wasn't luxurious in a sterile, hotel-like way. It was lived in, curated with a fierce, personal intelligence. The walls were a gallery in themselves, covered with an eclectic mix of paintings, some bold and modern, others delicate and ancient-looking. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned under the weight of hundreds of books. The air smelled of old paper, oil paint, and that same clean sandalwood scent that clung to her. "Make yourself at home," she said, slipping off her heels with a sigh of relief. "Would you like a drink? Wine? Something stronger?" "Wine would be great, thank you," I said, my voice still a little breathless. I wandered over to the bookshelves, running my fingers along the spines. It was a library of a passionate, omnivorous reader. Art history nestled against philosophy, classic literature beside contemporary poetry, books on quantum physics and mythology. "Are you an artist, too?" I asked, gesturing to the paintings on the walls. She emerged from the small kitchen area with 2 glasses of deep red wine. "My relationship with art is complicated," she said, handing me a glass. Her fingers brushed against mine, and another electric jolt passed between us. "I once wanted to be a painter. A proper one, locked away in a garret, suffering for my craft." She smiled wryly. Life had other plans. Now, I'm just a collector. A curator of beautiful things I couldn't create myself. What about you? "I'm an art student," I said, taking a sip of the wine. It was rich and complex, unlike the cheap boxed wine I was used to. "But I'm still not sure what I want to do. Sometimes I think I just like the idea of being an artist more than the actual work." Julia tilted her head, considering me. "Sometimes," she said softly, "knowing what you don't want is infinitely more valuable than knowing what you do want. It narrows the field." We sat on her large, comfortable sofa, and the hours began to melt away. We talked. We talked about everything. About the artists we loved. She introduced me to several I'd never heard of, her descriptions so vivid I could almost see their work. We talked about music, and she played me a record of haunting Portuguese fado that made my heart ache. We talked about books, and cities we wanted to visit, and the peculiar loneliness of being surrounded by millions of people in New York. As we talked, I forgot about the 20-year age gap between us. She didn't talk down to me or perform world weariness. She asked me questions, real questions, and she listened to my answers with a focus I had never experienced before. She listened as if my thoughts were the most fascinating thing she'd heard all week. In the warm, intimate cocoon of her loft, with the city lights twinkling outside the windows, I felt myself unfolding, petal by petal. The wine bottle emptied, but our conversation seemed to have its own endless supply of fuel. Why did you bring me here? I finally asked, the question that had been hovering in the air between us all night. Julia put down her glass and turned to face me fully on the sofa. She tilted her head slightly, her ash-grey eyes finding mine and holding them. The intensity of her gaze was both terrifying and exhilarating. Because I saw something in your eyes, she said, her voice low and serious. Back at the gallery. A curiosity. A hunger. It felt familiar. What kind of hunger? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, cracking with a nervous excitement I didn't fully understand. She shifted closer. Now there were only a few inches between us. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. A hunger for something you haven't yet named, she said. Her eyes were soft, understanding. I see myself in you, Rose. The me from 20 years ago. The one who was watching the world from behind a pane of glass, waiting for someone to tap on it and show her how to step through. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand. Her fingers, cool from holding her wine glass, lightly touched my cheek. It was the briefest of contacts, but it sent a shockwave through my entire nervous system. Every cell in my body seemed to sit up and pay attention. Are you afraid? She asked, her thumb stroking my cheekbone with an almost imperceptible pressure. No, I lied, my voice trembling. A gentle smile touched her lips. Still not good at lying. Her hand slid from my cheek to my neck, her fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, then down to my shoulder. Each point of contact felt like a tiny flame being ignited on my skin. My breath hitched in my throat. Have you ever been like this with a woman before? She asked, her voice as soft as a whisper. I shook my head, unable to speak. Have you ever thought about it? This question struck a deep, hidden chord within me. Of course, I had thought about it. How could I not? There were the confusing jolts of attraction I'd feel for a female friend at university. The way I'd notice the curve of a woman's neck or the sound of her laugh with an intensity that felt different, more profound, than my appreciation for any man. There was the persistent emptiness I felt when kissing my boyfriends, a sense of performing a role I'd never quite mastered, a feeling that something essential was missing from the equation. But to admit these things, to give them a name, felt like stepping off a cliff into an unknown abyss. I have thought about it, I finally confessed, the words feeling both dangerous and liberating as they left my lips. Julia didn't press further. That night, she didn't do anything more. She didn't kiss me. She just sat with me, her presence a steady, calming force. She held my hand, her thumb drawing slow circles on my palm, and we talked until the sky outside the large windows began to lighten from black to deep indigo. It's late, she said finally, her voice thick with sleep. You can leave if you want. Or you can stay. I have a perfectly comfortable couch. I won't hurt you, Rose. You have my word. I chose to stay. The thought of leaving the warmth and safety of her space, of returning to my sterile dorm room, felt unbearable. She gave me a soft, worn t-shirt to sleep in and showed me the bathroom. When she retreated to her bedroom, closing the door behind her, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind and body humming with a new, strange energy. I didn't know what to call what I was feeling. The only thing I knew for certain was that the magnetic pull I felt towards Julia was stronger, more real, than anything I had ever felt with any man. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the massive windows, painting golden rectangles on the wooden floor. The smell of coffee filled the air. I sat up, disoriented, and saw Julia in the kitchen. Her hair was delightfully messy, and she was wearing only a long t-shirt that reached her mid-thigh. The morning light illuminated her profile, and in that unguarded moment, I couldn't deny the sheer, arresting beauty of her. It was a beauty of substance, of experience. Good morning, she said, her voice warm and raspy with sleep. She handed me a mug of steaming coffee. Did you sleep well? Not really, I admitted with a shaky laugh. She smiled, a genuine, crinkly-eyed smile. Understandable. We drank our coffee in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. The awkwardness of the night had been replaced by a new, tentative intimacy. Would you like to see me again? She asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. Just as friends. We can go to a museum. Walk in the park. No pressure, Rose. I mean it. Yes, I said, without a moment's hesitation. I'd like that very much. And so it began. Our courtship, though that word feels too simple for what it was. It was an education. An awakening. We met the following Saturday at the Met. Julia became my personal descent, showing me pieces I'd walked past a dozen times and revealing their hidden stories. She didn't just talk about brushstrokes and composition. She talked about the lives of the artists, the lovers who inspired them, the heartbreak etched into a portrait's eyes. She showed me a small, exquisite sculpture of two women embracing, a piece from ancient Greece, and whispered, "Love like this has always existed. It's only the world's eyes that have changed." We walked through Central Park as the autumn leaves turned to fire. We shared slices of pizza on a park bench, and she told me about her own youth, about her brief, unhappy marriage to a man, about the child she'd had, a daughter, now grown and living in California. She spoke of the profound love she had for her daughter, but also of the deep, unnameable loneliness that had plagued her through those years. I felt like I was living a life written by someone else, she said, her gaze distant. I was following a script. Wife. Mother. And I was good at it. But every night, when the house was quiet, I felt this absence. As if I'd left the most important part of myself somewhere else. With each meeting, the magnetic pull between us grew stronger. Julia was always gentle, always respectful, but the tension was a live wire humming in the space between us. She maintained a careful distance, a professional boundary as she had jokingly called it, allowing me to set the pace. The shift happened one evening a few weeks later, after a simple dinner she had cooked at her loft. We were washing up together, our shoulders brushing in the small kitchen. The air was thick with unsaid things. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine, smell the scent of her shampoo. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. As she dried a plate, her hand resting on the counter, I gathered every ounce of courage I possessed. I reached out and placed my hand on top of hers. She stilled. The only sound was the drip of the tap and the frantic beating of my own heart. She slowly turned her hand over so our palms were touching, her fingers interlacing with mine. Her skin was warm, her grip firm and sure. She turned to look at me, her ash-grey eyes searching mine. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice low and serious. "I'm older, Rose. My life is settled. You're just beginning to discover everything. I need you to be sure." In that moment, all the confusion, all the half-formed desires and quiet yearnings coalesced into a single, crystalline certainty. "I know what I want," I said, and for the first time, my voice didn't shake. She leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I closed my eyes. That first kiss. I cannot describe it with any justice. It was not like the kisses I had known with boys, clumsy, wet, a negotiation of noses and teeth. This was a homecoming. Julia's lips were soft and knowing. They moved against mine with a slow, confident pressure that was both questioning and answering. It was a kiss that held 20 years of patience and experience. It was a key turning in a lock I hadn't even known existed. A sound, something between a sigh and a sob, escaped my throat. All my fears and doubts didn't just melt away. They evaporated, as if they had never been anything more than a morning mist. I had thought this might feel strange, or wrong, or forbidden. But on the contrary, for the first time in my life, something felt profoundly, unequivocally right. It was as if a part of my soul, a part one had been carrying separately for 21 years, suddenly clicked into place. My hands came up to tangle in her short, silvery black hair. Her arms wrapped around me, pulling me flush against her body. She was solid, real. The feeling of her, the softness of her breasts against mine, the strength in her back, was a revelation. Instead of sharp angles and hard muscle, there was a glorious, yielding softness, a symphony of curves and warmth. That night, Julia taught me everything. She led me to her bedroom, a sanctuary of soft light and piles of books, and undressed me with a reverence that made me feel not exposed, but worshipped. Every touch of hers was a lesson in patience and care. She touched my body with the admiration of a collector appreciating a fine piece of art, teaching me the geography of my own pleasure. The body is a map, she whispered against my skin as her hands explored my stomach, my thighs. You just have to learn how to read it. The age difference between us wasn't an obstacle. It was the foundation of the safest space I had ever known. Her experience held my shyness, her confidence cradled my exploration. She was a guide, showing me the hidden pathways of sensation I never knew I possessed. Here, she would murmur, her fingers tracing a pattern on the inside of my wrist, my hip, the back of my knee. Do you feel that? That little current. That's life. As she guided me, her words flowed into my ear like a lullaby, and my body, a willing instrument, responded to her every directive. When her mouth finally found the most intimate part of me, I gasped, my back arching off the bed. It wasn't an invasion. It was a devotion. Her tongue was an artist, painting sensations I had no names for. This is natural, she said, her voice a vibration against my skin. Feeling this is the most natural thing in the world. For the first time, I trembled not from anxiety, but from a pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. I cried out, my fingers clutching at the sheets, as a wave of release crashed over me, so powerful it felt like a rebirth. In its wake, I lay breathless, tears streaming down my temples and into my hair. Julia wiped them away with infinite tenderness. Are you crying? She asked, her voice full of concern. I smiled through the tears, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washing over me. From happiness, I choked out. I feel like I've found a part of me that's been lost for years. She gathered me into her arms, holding me tightly. She stroked my hair and began to hum a song, an old, melancholic tune. At that moment, wrapped in her scent and her strength, I understood. This wasn't just a sexual discovery. This had become home. In the hazy, half-dream state that follows lovemaking, I told her everything. I confessed about my high school boyfriends, the performative nature of my affection. I told her about the drunken kiss with my friend Sarah the year before, and the suffocating silence that followed. But after that, I whispered into the darkness, I couldn't feel the same way with any man. It was like a switch had been flipped. Julia's eyes shone in the moonlight filtering through the window. Fear, she said softly, appears much larger than it really is. Our fears build walls and force us to live in small rooms, while the world outside is vast and wide and waiting. Her fingers traced lazy patterns along my spine. You don't need to be afraid anymore, Rose. The truth is always liberating, no matter how painful it seems at first. I rested my head on her chest, listening to the steady, strong rhythm of her heartbeat. The constant, low-grade noise of anxiety that had been the soundtrack of my life, the worry about what people thought, the fear of not being normal, finally fell silent. For the first time, I was just me. Towards dawn, lying tangled in her sheets and her limbs, I asked the question that had been forming all night. Tell me what's happening to me. Julia stroked my hair away from my forehead. You're discovering yourself, she said simply. You're waking up. This is just the beginning of the journey, Rose. And I'm just your guide for this part of the path. What if I want more? I asked, a new fear creeping in. What if I want not just a discovery, but a life? A real life, with a woman, out in the open. Julia took a deep breath, and I felt her chest rise and fall beneath my cheek. Then you'll discover that, too. But don't rush. This path, it can be difficult. Beautiful, but difficult. People might not understand. Family, friends, they might not accept it. You need to be sure you're ready for that. You need to be sure the person you're becoming is strong enough to withstand the world. In the weeks and months that followed, Julia's loft became my sanctuary, my classroom, my temple. She taught me not only the physical poetry of making love to a woman but, more importantly, how to accept the woman I was becoming. Our relationship was a bubble outside of time, a space where I could experiment, ask questions, and shed the skin of my old life. Every question I asked her unraveled another knot inside me. How did you know? I asked her once, as we lay on a blanket in the park. I mean, really know that being a lesbian was who you were? Julia looked up at the clouds, her eyes gazing into the past. I think I always knew, in a quiet, subterranean way. But accepting it giving it a name, living it openly, that took years. Decades. When I was your age, the world was different. I tried marriage. I truly loved my husband, in a way. I adored my daughter from the moment she was born. But it was like I was a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. I had to shave off parts of myself to make it work. And every night, a part of me felt missing. Until one day, a woman came into my life, just a few years older than I was then, and she showed me who I really was. She held up a mirror, and for the first time, the reflection made sense. What happened to her? I asked, propping myself up on an elbow. A sad, wistful smile appeared on Julia's face. She left. Life pulled her in another direction. She had her own journey, her own fears. It broke my heart for a long time. But the gift she gave me remained. The freedom to know myself. To stop pretending. She reached over and held my hand, her grip firm. I can't promise you forever, Rose. I'm at a different stage. My life is here, quiet, settled. Yours is just exploding into being. I may not be the one to walk the whole path with you. But you will always, always carry the gift I've given you. The freedom to know who you are. No one can ever take that from you. At that moment, with a clarity that was both painful and beautiful, I understood what Julia was to me. She wasn't my first love, not in the traditional, forever after sense. She was my catalyst. My guide. She was the mirror in which I first saw my true reflection. She had gently, patiently, erased the fears and doubts that had been scribbled over my soul. She taught me that being a lesbian wasn't just a sexual orientation. It was a way of existing in the world. A way of loving, of seeing, of feeling that was deeper and more authentic than anything I had ever known. Julia taught me to be myself, without shame, without apology. And that was the most valuable lesson I would ever learn. Today, it has been a year since I met Julia in that gallery. We still see each other, but the nature of our relationship has changed, just as she said it would. We are friends now, deep and abiding friends. She is still my guide, but I am now charting my own path. A few months ago, I came out to my family. It was messy and emotional, and my mother still doesn't fully understand, but they are trying. I came out at university, and to my surprise, I found a community. I met my first girlfriend, Sarah, a different Sarah, a film student with a riot of curly hair and a laugh that could light up a room. It's new, and it's exciting, and it's ours. For the first time in my life, I feel truly, completely happy. Julia was right. This path isn't always easy. The world doesn't always understand. But the freedom to be myself, to love openly and without pretense, is worth every challenge. Sometimes, late at night, I think of Julia's ash-grey eyes. I found myself in their reflective depths. And for the first time, when I look in the mirror, I truly see myself. Rose, 21 years old, an artist, a lover, a woman. I have nothing to hide anymore. I have nothing to fear. I am proud to be a lesbian. And I am telling you this story not for nostalgia, but in the fervent hope that it might, in some small way, help you find the courage to find yourself, too. To listen to your own hunger, to find your own guide, and to step through the glass into the vibrant, colorful life that is waiting for you on the other side.